To nobody's surprise, everyone, Georgia is in the national championship game, but of course it was a bit touch and go against Ohio State. We got Anthony Dasher on the line from Rivals. Catch his work at ugasports.com. Anthony, we appreciate you coming on back.
My pleasure.
All right. Before we move on to this TCU matchup, of course, there were some nervous moments against Ohio State. I think we can pick out about 5-6 moments in the fourth quarter and say, well, if that would have gone that way, I don't know if Georgia would have been able to pull that one out. But to their credit, down 14 in the fourth quarter, they got it done.
Yeah, you can say, a lot of people I know are pointing out, that, Marvin Harrison, Jr. goes out with concussion. People like to point that one out, but whereas, same time, George had players that was missing too. So I don't know if I put quite as much stock into that one as others do, but but no doubt Ohio State was just fantastic. CJ Stroud, that was as good of a performance by a quarterback in a game that I've personally seen in a long time. And in fact, the game itself was one of the best Georgia games that I've hate to say maybe best I've seen as far as excitement goes in 25 years of covering the team, but it may well have been. I mean, the 2018 Rose Bowl against Oklahoma where Georgia won in overtime, that was exciting. It was I'm sure the advertisers got their money's worth from it. But that game was like back and forth, back and forth. This game, Georgia was down 14 points entering the fourth quarter, and until that time, really had not shown much signs of, being able to pull that one out. But, despite struggling, I mean, the team didn't play its best game. Stetson Bennett had not played his best game, but when that fourth quarter rolled around, something clicked. And then at the very end, Ohio State misses a 50-yard field goal, and Georgia's now going back to the national championship with a chance to defend its title.
From a kicker who hit a 48-yard field goal just a few minutes earlier. So it was certainly possible and not necessarily out of his range, although not the best circumstance for Ohio State in terms of trying a 50-yarder under those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
We got Anthony Dasher here from UGAsports.com to break down Georgia and TCU, but a lot to unpack with this a game against Ohio State that was quite the thriller. You mentioned the injuries on the Ohio State side. They lost a couple running backs earlier in the year. Their tight end left the game as well, Cade Stover. We could go down maybe some more from a national standpoint, more publicized injuries. However, beyond Darnell Washington, who left the game and, of course, is one of the better tight ends, both from a pass catching standpoint, but more from a blocking standpoint, tight ends in the nation. Nolan Smith is standing on the sideline. Can you give us an idea for some of those people? And the injury situation always works for whatever fan base you are. If you're on the Ohio State side, you're going to emphasize the guys that they were missing. Georgia's side's going to do the same. But Nolan Smith standing on the sideline, give us an idea where Georgia stands versus what they would have been fully healthy.
Well, Georgia didn't have a starting right tackle, Warren McClendon, who some folks had him voted as All SEC this year. They of course not saying that Georgia's lacking talent because they just plug in Amarius Mims, who's he's 6'7", 325 pounds, and maybe one of the best sophomore linemen in the country. But still, you're talking about a guy who has been the leader of the offensive line the entire season, and he just brings a lot to the table. Then Ladd McConkey, although he played, he was probably about 80% after injuring his knee against LSU, in the SEC title game, a few weeks back. They had been missing running back Andrew Paul all year long. Andrew was a true freshman, was supposed to come in this year and have a big impact. He did not. He was not obviously available after tearing his ACL. They've had other wide receivers. They just now getting A.D. Mitchell. But A.D. Mitchell played and caught a touchdown, but he was not 100%. So I mean, every team's got injuries this time of year. So that's why I don't. When I hear people say, "Well, if so and so had been healthy for Ohio State, they would have definitely won the ball game," I don't necessarily buy that because this time of year, everybody's got somebody hurt. Everybody has somebody who is not at his best at this time of year. So I know why people like to say that, but I don't think it's necessarily true as far as how this game ultimately turned out.
Yeah, and absolutely just a phenomenal game and everything we hoped for anybody who wasn't rooting for one of the two teams, just in terms of having two of the top three most talented teams in the country playing not necessarily a mistake-free game. I don't want to say
No,
that
no, no,
because
not
there
at
were all
all.
sorts of mistakes all over, but just an
Yeah,
exciting down to the wire, a lot of athleticism on display, just two tremendous football teams, and Georgia gets it done. Uh, from a defensive standpoint, so we know that Ohio State's going to roll out about as good an offense, especially in the passing game. And that's just not weapons, that's pass protection as well, was
yeah,
extremely good in this game
yes, it was.
than anybody in the country. But coming off the LSU SEC championship game and some of the things we talked about and some of the questions about Georgia's pass defense,
Hmm.
uh, how do you rate, consider, analyze what they do in the secondary and the absence of a pass rush for most of this game?
Yeah, Georgia did have 4 sacks, but that was really, but otherwise, no. Stroud was not really, pressured too much. He had plenty of time to sit back in that pocket and make plays. And those receivers they have are just so good. It just give Stroud some time. They're going to get open one way or the other. And we saw some just tremendous plays by those guys. And although again there were some mistakes by George, but again, at the same time, I don't want to take anything away from what we saw from the Buckeye, wide receivers who were just, tremendous. I mean, Harrison was again, good as I've seen in a long, long time. This guy's going to make a ton of money in the NFL coming up here, starting here, very soon. But the secondary is, I think, a little bit of a concern. It's 2 games in a row now where Georgia's given up a bunch of passing yards, and here comes TCU with the quarterback Max Duggan, who was finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting this past year, and Max is a more adept runner, can get things done on the ground a lot better. So that's going to be another challenge for Georgia's defense, and that could make him even more dangerous in the passing game because again, if you're Georgia, do you spy him? Do you blitz him? If you blitz him, then somebody's going to be wide open again, perhaps. And with Georgia struggles, I know that's going to be a big concern.
Talking of the national championship game, TCU taking on Georgia, we expected the Bulldogs to be here going all the way back through the offseason for the most part. Could have been anything concerning Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, who knows. But this is not a big surprise for one of these two teams, but for TCU coming off 5-7 with a new coaching staff and Sonny Dykes taking over the program, this is a bit of a shocker to see them land. But for as much as they get disrespected every week and it's like, oh, they're going to lose this one or lose this one or lose, they just keep navigating all the way through, and they're showing up as a 13-point dog. So again, nobody expects them to pull this off.
Yeah, I mean that's a tremendous story. Like I said, 5-7 last year, first year coach. I mean, that's just amazing what they've been able to accomplish this year. And again, not taking any away from the players they have, but nobody in his right mind would have been picking the Horned Frogs to make it this far. And they're going against a Georgia team, like you said, which won it last year. Although Georgia's had its share of doubters, too. When you lose 15 players to the NFL, there's not going to be a ton of people think you can, maybe win it again. But here at Georgia is we have a chance, and we'll see what happens. I mean, Stetson Bennett. We'll talk about underdogs. I mean, there's another guy. We talked about him a lot, and if he were to go out and win 2 in a row, we all know his story. I mean, I'm sitting here right now having a hard time trying to come up with a bigger individual story in the sport in years. So you take that, combine that with TCU story of being the season-long underdog, being where they're at. Mark put it against Stetson Bennett, what he's trying to accomplish. Great storyline for this game Monday night.
Anthony, I can't remember a turnaround like this.
No.
Since the only one that I can come up with would be the Auburn team that went 3-9 in 2012.
Yeah.
They fire Gene Chizik. Gus Malzahn shows up and takes them within a few seconds of winning the national championship against Florida State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the only one that even crosses my mind. Before that, you have to do some research for me because I won't have a clue. But I do remember that Auburn team from that year. Nobody, again, like TCU, nobody thought they would, even finish in the middle of the pack in the SEC West. But look what they were able to accomplish that year, and like I said, almost pulled off against the Seminoles.
And I hate to bring up Auburn for a lot of your followers there. I know that that's a dirty word, but you've been beating them down for quite a long time now, so it's not so bad now. Getting back to this defense, obviously it was historic last year. They had one letdown against Alabama. they got things fixed. But when you look at the broad picture, especially with the way teams are throwing the ball and scoring and putting up yardage, it was just phenomenal what they did last year. Of course, they lose the 5 first rounders and then the other players to the NFL draft, and people were wondering, okay, what's this going to look like this year? There didn't appear to be much of a drop off, especially considering Oregon and Tennessee are 2 of the top 5 to 10 offenses in college football, and they took care of them with no issue. The LSU, sure, there was the situation with yardage and points in the second half, but that got dismissed because of the game situation being out of hand. Ohio State was really the first one that, with the game on the line, showed that they could damage this defense. So
Yeah.
where do you think all of that, how do you weigh all of that when you put it all together, last year's defense versus this year's defense? And I still think it's probably the best defense in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of all relative. What the defense did last year was, I mean, the players I had last year was, it just kind of speaks for itself a little bit. This year's defense, you've got younger players, guys playing for the first time, whereas last year you had a lot of veteran players, on that team. It played a lot of football on the defensive side. But I still think Georgia's defense is one of the best in the country. I think teams as seasons go along has maybe picked out a few things that they've been able to take advantage of as far as what Georgia normally does. They've been playing, I won't say they haven't been playing, vanilla or anything of that nature, but other teams have been able to pick out a few things where they've been able to be, successful. And people have been going at Keely Ringo a little bit. He's made some mistakes, had some pass interference calls, and guys have stretches they go through sometimes. I think maybe that's kind of what's going on with him just a little bit. But overall, I still think Georgia has one of the better defenses in the country. And they just run across some very good offenses, too. You got to give those guys credit from time to time as well.
Anthony, I didn't really keep track during the game, of course, watched every play, but I just noticed this running back, the distribution of the carries and the workload. I didn't really chart it in terms of, is there a set pattern to that, or did they just kind of go by feel or hot hand or whatever kind of plays approach they're going to take that series between the three?
There's really no approach. They typically will split carries. That's what they've done all year long. I mean, they'll run Kenny McIntosh for a series or two. Then they'll bring in, Dejon Edwards, Kendall Milton will come in. It's just a feel thing more than anything else. All those guys have gotten other opportunities this year, and we'll continue to do so. I think in the championship game coming up on Monday night, but they feel they got 3 very good backs. They like to keep them fresh, and that's something really all these guys have bought into. Back in the day, you couldn't really get a top running back to come to a school if he wasn't promised 300 carries or whatever and be the main guy, so to speak. But at Georgia, they've convinced these guys, hey, we've also got your future, thinking about that as well. We're going to split carries up and make sure you're healthy for the next level. So, and thusly, they've been able to get guys to buy in, and that's kind of the same approach they use during games. They're going to try to keep guys fresh, run them in and out, and they've got 3 very good kids right now who can do the job.
I would say the offensive line's been one of the best in the nation over the last 4, 5, 6 years since Kirby brought it to this level. Right there with some of the better Wisconsin lines and what Alabama typically produces. Your thoughts about the offensive line versus what it's been, last year and before?
Been very solid, been very consistent. I mentioned not having Warren McClendon, for this past game, but a lot of teams, you lose your starting right tackle who started, every game this season, might be in for some trouble. But like I said, Amarius Mims, they plug in another guy who was a 5-star, I think he's actually the top recruited offensive lineman in the country, 2 years ago. And so that's kind of talent they're replacing somebody like McClendon with. But it's been a consistent. They've had this same group have been starting, the entire season. Broderick Jones at left tackle, going to probably move on to the NFL after this year. Is going to be, I think, an early round pick. Cedric Van Pran, the center, is for New Orleans, has played a ton of football. And you got a couple of really solid guards, like Xavier Trust and Tate Ratledge. In fact, we talked to Coach Searles, the offensive line coach, the other day when they had everybody in for the big media day, and he talked a lot about the connectivity that this group has, and I think that's really kind of hitting the nail on the head, so to speak. This group plays together play with a lot of confidence, and they're a big reason why Georgia has the offensive success that it does.
Got Anthony Dasher on the line from UGAsports.com. Catch his work on Rivals. It's right there on the banner. And follow him on Twitter at Anthony Dasher1. We look at what both of these teams produced coming off just historic national semifinal games. And the Stetson Bennett, Max Duggan, their storylines are interesting. And you alluded to Max Duggan and how that's just remarkable. Some of the health issues he's come back from. He wasn't even the starting quarterback to start this season. How do you compare these two quarterbacks? Because in so many ways, they seem to be pretty similar. We're not talking about Vince Young and Michael Vick, but they're extremely elusive, tough runners. Duggan's a bigger guy. He's going to lay a shoulder into a linebacker from time to time, a little bit more than Stetson Bennett. But from a passing skill standpoint, again, they're the two quarterbacks out of the four in the playoffs that the NFL scouts aren't going to be as impressed with, but they get the job done. So just your thoughts about because to me, they seem to be fairly similar quarterbacks in a lot of ways.
They are. I mean, I think, Max may be a better runner, just if you were going to look at the stats. I mean, Stetson, probably doesn't run as much as he probably could or should do, but both of these guys, just like you mentioned, as well, kind of a similar background from the standpoint they've had to prove people wrong. It seemed like their entire career, and Max not even being the starter when the season began, just like Stetson was, last year. So you can take those things together, but otherwise, they obviously know the offenses, inside and out. They're no longer considered your game manager. They are considered playmakers. And both have good arms. Both are tremendous leaders, and two players, their teams, respective teams, I think do a great job of rallying around. So it's going to be an interesting contest, and really curious to see how it kind of plays out.
There was thought out there that Michigan took a TCU for granted, which I don't typically buy into that.
Yeah.
I think that TCU is just that good, although there were some Michigan comments. What's that, Anthony?
I think that's an excuse right there when people throw it over. If suggest they overlook somebody or whatnot, that's just an excuse.
Absolutely. That's not giving TCU the credit they deserve because they went out and won that game. There were some Michigan comments made throughout the week, and I didn't even look into this. This was stuff that was brought up to me that seemed to be a bit dismissive of TCU and the conference they play in.
Yeah.
I can't imagine Kirby's bunch is going to fall into that trap.
No, just because of the way Georgia practices, that's not going to happen. I mean, you hear, players will tell you that their practices are harder than games, and they do that so they won't overlook anybody. I mean, you hear the comments you'll hear leading up to this game will be a lot of ways the very same as when Georgia played the likes of Samford and Kent State. I mean, they don't look at games like that. They don't look at somebody across the field and say, oh, that team's going to be easier to beat. This team doesn't have this, doesn't have that. That's not how they look at it. They don't deal with it that way. They worry. They focus on themselves, what they've got to do to win. And really, the opponent, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's Samford, Tennessee, Ohio State, or TCU. They're going to approach every single game the exact same way. So I don't think overlooking TCU is not going to be in the cards.
If they do what everyone expects them to do and win this game, whether it's by 1 or by 50, and win another national championship, you got to consider this the pinnacle of Georgia football for all the great teams throughout the years. A national championship last year, one back in 1980, 1942, and then a lot of teams that were very close and a proud football tradition. This would have to be the height of it.
No doubt about it. I mean, winning back-to-back titles is what's it happened? 2 other times, and it's been unanimous, type deal. Alabama did it in 11 and 12. But that just doesn't happen often. I mean, it takes a special team, a special program to make that happen. And if Georgia would somehow pull it off, that's like you said. This is Georgia fans right now. I know are enjoying the situation they're in. It's the glory days, as they like to say. But if they do pull it off, that would be quite the feat.
Do you look forward to catching a glimpse of the stadium and looking around? It looks from the outside and seeing the shots on TV, it looks more like a palace than it does a football stadium.
Yeah, it does. I mean, last time when Georgia was in Los Angeles for the Rose Bowl, they had just started construction on it. So we got to ride by it, on the way to Georgia's practice back for the Rose Bowl. So, and then, yeah, obviously seen it on television, watched the bowl games that's been in it this year. But yeah, looking forward to it. It looks like a heck of a place.
Before we let you go, Anthony, your thoughts on the SEC? It's a 6-5 bowl record for the conference. There's a lot that we can take away from those results, and others that we can't, with all the
Yeah,
opt-outs
that's what's
and
hard.
various things. But what are your thoughts about the SEC? Whether it's still the best conference, decidedly, or is it close? And what can we take from some of these
Well, you
results?
mentioned opt-outs. Opt-outs really hurt teams like Florida and Kentucky. I mean, those teams were not, at their best. Again, I hate using that to make excuses, either. That goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the injuries for Georgia and Ohio State and as such. But I think, though, if you look at the upper echelon teams in the conference, your Georgias, your Alabamas, your Tennessees, your LSUs, what those teams have been able to do and win in the fashion they've been able to win. Yeah, I still think you've got to say the SEC is the best, at least the upper part anyway. Maybe not be from top to bottom, but it's still a heck of a league, and I think the conference has done a very good job showing why many people still consider it to be the best league in the country.